Hello, Right Hivers. Happy to have you here again. My name is Sean Morrissey Carroll, and I am very happy to bring to you Redemption Beyond Good and Evil, a presentation by Daphne Strasert. You can catch Daphne's work most likely in Bigfoot Country, released in 2024. And Daphne is an editor and writer, as well as very much, I would say, someone who's interested in how those love interests, how those good and bad characters, those really gray, murky areas are explored in contemporary novels. Daphne, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and also what we're going to be talking about?
Right. So, like Sean said, I'm Daphne Strasert. I am an author, an editor, and a publishing professional. I work largely with romance and speculative fiction. As an editor, I specialize in genre fiction, specifically romance and horror. Those real heart-pounding genres right there. I also am a review coordinator and slush reader for Horror Addicts, which is a horror podcast that is also a has published works as well. So yes, as Sean said, I work a lot with romance, and enemies to lovers is certainly a big part of that. And so we're going to talk about redemption today, which is not just about love, but it plays into it a lot. So we'll get into it. But first of all, why do we love villains? These murky gray characters. Start with a nice quote from Klaus from Vampire Diaries. So you've never felt the attraction that comes from someone who's capable of doing terrible things, for some reason cares only about you. And that goes into a lot of why we love villains, because we love to be the exception to the rule. Villains have power. They bring a new perspective into the storyline. They're unpredictable in a way that heroes are not. And most importantly to this presentation, they have the capacity for growth. We love to redeem villains because it says something about the possibility of redemption for ourselves. People are not 100% good or evil. We're not talking about moral absolutism or even just like a religious idea of what it means to be good or evil. People are a mixture of motivations and circumstances, and this informs their decisions. People are generally not acting evil to be evil. They might be doing it out of self-interest. They might be doing it selfishly, but there are reasons that they're doing it. If it, whether it's, a childhood that showed them they were the only person that they could trust, whether it's a worldview that we may not agree with, but maybe they've got a point. Thinking about Killmonger from Black Panther, and a lot of people looking at his motivations, which he committed atrocities, but was he right? Right? And so that's where people start to like villains is looking at the world in a new way, and seeing if perhaps they have a point. Tom Hiddleston, when he was interviewed about his character Loki in the Avengers, said, if you look at the villains in the course of human history, they've all believed delusionally in the virtue of their actions. Every villain is a hero in his own mind. And I think that as we talk about redemption, that's important, because who is the character redeeming themselves to? Is it society in general? Is it the other characters of the novel? Is it to us as readers that they have to redeem themselves? And what does it mean for them to do that? Is redemption a end goal? Is there a point at which you are redeemed, or is it an ongoing process that asks, what are you doing to try to be redeemed? What are you doing to make yourself better?
Daphne, I'll say this, and it's interesting to me. One, looking at romance, but also movies like Sinners, where you have the two main characters, one of which is very much a moral absolutist and like trying to be a good guy, and the other who turns into a vampire. I don't think I'm giving too much spoilers by being a little vague about it, but you kind of feel like at the end of the movie that, like you could have rooted for either. They both have very good points, and it's like this open thing about like the rest of the world and how are you versus everything that's out there, and personal redemption and how that can be, like a terrible person, but they were nice to me.
Right. Right. I mean, even looking at characters who we would largely agree are objectively good, someone like Superman. Does Superman need redemption for not saving everyone? Right? He's got all this power, but he takes days off. Is that acceptable? Or does he need to redeem himself for something like that? Right? Is redemption an unobtainable goal? Or is it something that it is simply what we strive for? In fiction, redemption has a pretty simple definition. It's the realignment of a character from the villains to the heroes, for the most part. When you have your protagonists, who are typically considered the heroes, a villain coming back and coming into their fold would be considered part of the redemption arc. But it's more complicated than simply joining the heroes. It's more than just asking forgiveness. And this is where we take a departure from traditional Christianity, which believes that redemption is the asking for forgiveness, asking for salvation. When we're talking about the real world or even the fictional world, it's more important that redemption involve action, that there is a change in how you treat the world, and that they were making reparations in order to make up for it. I've put up a nice little if you've never seen The Anatomy of an Apology, I recommend you screenshot this because this is very helpful both for yourself and for teaching any children that you may have. What do you say? How do you do an apology? You say that you're sorry. You say what you did wrong. You take responsibility. You say that you won't do it again. You offer a way to fix it, and then you ask for forgiveness. And so these are things that, as you talk about creating redemption arcs for characters, look at how you can incorporate these things.
This doesn't have dying in it as well. And so many times, like a bad character who redeems themselves, like they jump into the fire. Absolutely.
We are going to talk about dying as a shortcut of redemption because I have feelings about it. But in fiction, things do not always work that way. So let's talk about how in fiction characters do redeem themselves, because there are a lot of different ways that we talk about redemption arcs, that a redemption arc can look like. So there's a long road, and I put Zuko up here because Zuko is largely considered the gold standard of redemption arcs. If you've ever watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, I recommend that you do. But this is when a character realizes that there's something fundamentally flawed about what they're doing, how they're approaching the world, or how they're looking at the world. They change their ways, they make sacrifices, and they make up for their past wrongs. This is a long process. It takes a very long time for a character to go through this. You're not going to do it in a montage. This is something that can take either a whole book or a whole series to happen. But it is, like I said, the gold standard. This is the true redemption arc that leaves everybody coming away feeling very satisfied with what happened here. Nobody feels like we took a shortcut. There's very little arguing about, did they deserve redemption? Did they earn redemption? Which is something we'll talk about more in the story, because you've done the work of making the character truly sometimes suffer, but truly earn it. But for shortcuts, Daphne, why is there a picture of the alien on the screen? Or sorry, excuse me, of the predator on the
Predator,
screen? The
yeah.
alien's in the background because this is Alien versus Predator. And if you don't think that's a redemption story, you really should go back and watch the 2000 classic movie once again. For this is a case of the heroes and the villains are thrown into a situation together. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, and we have to work together. And so through this process, the characters find a kind of common understanding, they form new alliances, they come to an understanding of each other that wouldn't be possible otherwise. And in acting to save our heroes, the villain becomes redeemed in a way. And so Alien versus Predator is a great example of this. Humans get locked in a pyramid with the aliens. The Predator comes in, and a Predator and a human have to team up for both of them to survive. This continues through the series when you get to Predators. You also have a human teaming up with a predator to try and escape this murderous world. There is a new Predator movie coming out that I don't know a lot about, but it looks like we're going to be kind of working along those same lines. And so you've created a villain, a very clear-cut villain, that has turned into a hero. You know who else falls in this category, though, Sean?
Oh,
Godzilla.
absolutely. Let's Godzilla. Let's say that this lizard brain actually understands morality.
Godzilla is good because Godzilla saves us from Mothra and Rodan. Um, Godzilla becomes a hero. And is that a redemption arc?
Oh,
It's
he's
a
doing it
kind of
so much for
redemption arc.
like he's doing it so much in in the movies that I've seen at least, doing it so much for himself, you know? But you're like, yes, please, Godzilla save us, you know, and it's like he doesn't even care about us, but we grow to identify with him. And then by this point where you're like talking about the hollow earth and stuff like that, there is something important there.
Yeah, I think that The Strange Bedfellows is an interesting shortcut. We'll talk about shortcuts to redemption because that's what we're talking about a lot today. But it's an interesting shortcut to redemption because it doesn't take into account the character's motivations. Godzilla and the Predator are not having any sort of internal turmoil of, should I save this person? Is that the right thing to do? They're doing it largely out of self-interest, but because they're realigning themselves with the hero, it's considered a form of redemption. So how much does the internal change of heart matter to redemption? And we have the lesser evil. So this is when a character is the main villain in the beginning, but through an escalation of tensions and an escalation of evil in the other villains, they're come to seem largely harmless. And at that point, they will often team up with the heroes and be redeemed in that way. And so I've got Team Rocket here. Now, are Team Rocket truly ever heroes? No, I don't think so. But they are a great example of someone who starts out as evil in the eyes of the characters and becomes later on more or less just a joke. And so they're not considered really evil anymore in comparison. Now, a better example of this would be Loki. Loki in the original Thor movie and then in the original Avengers, very clear cut villain. He is trying to take over the world. He's trying to harm his brother. He doesn't care who gets in the way. Then we get into Thor Dark World and he becomes an anti-hero. He is an unlikely ally who is needed for his strengths, but also acts selflessly sometimes. And so he's an anti-hero. And then when we get into Thor Ragnarok, he truly does become a hero. There is no more betrayal. It is just him working for the good of the Asgardians, even if it's a little bit selfishly for his ego. He is trying to help, and then he sacrifices himself at the beginning of Infinity War. And so we get a redemption arc that is about they start to come up against greater issues, and Loki becomes less of a problem, and because of that, becomes more of a help. And then he becomes a true hero when he gets his own series. And so I like that arc. I think that that arc is a fun way of doing things. Now, an anti-hero is when you have a character who does good things for the wrong reasons, usually selfish reasons, or alternatively, they do bad things for good reasons. They might make themselves into a villain because that's who is needed right now.
As you said, the Killmonger example, you know,
We talk a lot about superheroes because they make really good examples. The
clear
captive
cut.
audience. Our character is captured or manipulated by the heroes so that they have to spend time being good, even if it is against their will. This is Spike from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. He is captured by them at one point. He is later captured by a government agency that puts a chip in him that stops him from doing evil things. And this is the turning point for him where when he's not able to harm people, he starts to get along with the heroes and he starts to see the point of the heroes. And eventually does make a conscious habit of or a conscious decision to be good, to be a hero later in the series. But it is not without duress. The original change comes because they are given no other choice. It is simply an entryway into doing good. All right, the power of love. We started off talking a little bit about romance, and this is the true romance redeems all. The power of love is not just about romantic relationships, though. It could be a familial or platonic relationship. But the idea is that villain, they can't be too bad. So and so loves them. So there must be something good inside of them, right? Damon Salvatore, who does terrible, terrible things in the Vampire Diaries, murders just so many people, and never actually makes a true effort at redemption at all, ever. He stops doing bad things because the girl he is interested in doesn't like when he does them, but he doesn't really care about doing good for good's sake. And for many characters, their redemption arc begins and ends with, well, they're sexy. You have characters who are played by attractive actors, or are drawn attractively, or are written attractively. And so we kind of gloss over the fact that they're kind of monsters. They might not truly do the work of redemption, but by virtue of being attractive and by virtue of being aligned with a hero, we forgive them for their wrongs, even if we don't see them make any sort of reparation. The other example I have of this is Regina, from Once Upon a Time. My husband hates Regina, and believes fully that she does not deserve to be redeemed because she has committed genocide like multiple times. And she aligns with the heroes because her son cares about her and also is one of the heroes. And so she is kind of dragged unwillingly into the heroes' fold, has to do things that are against her self-interest but are more selfless, in order to win back the affection of her son. And so she becomes a hero kind of through that. She does do some work of trying to not be evil, but that tendency is really kind of always there for her. And the question is, could she ever do enough to make up for what she had done wrong? Really hope the next one is yes. And that brings us to the dying breath. So can you ever truly make up for things if you're a real monster? In the dying breath, a character dies before we're able to fully answer that question. They commit the final selfless act of sacrificing themselves to save the heroes, save the world, save society. But we never have to reckon with what would have happened after that, right? Kylo Ren, then Ben Solo dies, saving Rey. And so we never have to ask the question of what would have come next. Would the rebels or the Republic ever have forgiven him for the monstrous things that he had done? Remember, he's involved in destroying solar systems, not just planets, not just cities, like solar systems, whole giant groups of people, genocide on a scale that we can't truly conceive of. And how do you come back for that? And the question is, would he be tried for war crimes? Would he be killed anyway? Would we just accept it because he helped the hero at the end and she likes him? And so we don't have to answer those messy questions because they died before we could say that. And you can't sacrifice more than your life. So we say, I mean, I guess it all kind of weighs out in the end. Still in Star Wars, the same thing happens with Anakin Skywalker, Darth Vader. He does lots of terrible things, starting when he is in his like early 20s, and continues to support a brutal regime. He's involved in the Death Star, the destruction of worlds. But in the end, he kills the Emperor and saves Luke Skywalker. And that is apparently enough to redeem him that he gets to go be a Jedi ghost with the other good Jedi ghosts. He does not get consigned to oblivion like all of the other Sith Lords. His dying breath, his last act, was to do something good and die in the process. And so therefore he gets to be one of the good guys.
I can say this about Anakin as well because of the early movies, like there's a big exploration of how he becomes that. And in the idea of like further exploring your world and stuff like that, if you're a writer and you're thinking about creating one of these gray characters, sometimes it's good to write some short stories or at least think about and sketch out ideas of like how they ended up that way. uh what the love of a woman can definitely drive people to madness in this particular case. My desire for power that gets twisted, thinking that they're doing the right thing and having bad results, or doing the right thing and being misinterpreted. You brought up Superman earlier. I the the gray area starts long before the story actually does.
Truly compelling villains have good reasons, right? You're not necessarily the reasons that you would agree with, but ones that you can at least look at and say, yeah, I kind of get it, right? Uh, I see what happened, right? There were issues with the Jedi. There were issues, legitimate issues with the Republic that Anakin could have seen as problems, but were they enough to justify what he did? I don't think so. But that's another question. Apparently, the Clone Wars does a really good job of exploring it, while it feels rather abrupt in the movies. Um, but we have one final example of this, a very recent example,
Mm.
which is Aunt Lydia from The Handmaid's Tale. Now, we've watched her for seasons. She's tortured people. She is complicit in the oppression of the handmaids. She's taken people's children away from them. She is a monster. She has done awful things. And her last act in the show is one of defiance to be a distraction, really, in order so that handmaids can escape. And the discourse online right now, still going on because this is very fresh, is she didn't deserve it. She didn't deserve to come back from this. You don't get a redemption arc. You can have your attempt, you can do one last good thing, but no, you're not going to join the heroes, even posthumously, because you simply, like, your life wasn't enough to make up for all of the things that you had done. And in this case, she is just simply hated that much. She does not get the benefit of the doubt that Darth Vader and Kylo Ren get because they're attractive. I want to point this out again. For so many cases of redemption stories, being attractive is enough. Aunt Lydia does not get that little detail in her favor. We simply hate her too much. And this is my final type of redemption, which is the non-redemption redemption. Is when something is revealed that means that the character was never doing anything wrong in the first place, right? We've spent seasons or books hating this person because of the evil deeds they've done, the betrayal that they had enacted on the heroes. But then it comes to light that no, they were actually on the hero's side all the time, and everything that they had done was in the furthering of the hero's purpose. Itachi Uchiha is the best example of this. He murdered his entire clan with the exception of his little brother, and then went on to become a huge villain. But it is revealed in the end that all of that was done to save his little brother Sasuke, and that he was truly a hero, and the sacrifice he made in being perceived as a villain was worse than anyone could have imagined. So you don't have to have a redemption arc. He didn't really do anything wrong in the first place. That's the idea. The other big example of this, and I try not to do Harry Potter, but the other big example of this is Severus Snape. It is revealed at the end that he was always working for Dumbledore. He was always on the side of the heroes, even if he was doing some pretty gray things. Now, does that excuse the fact that he would bully children and was just like kind of a merciless person in general? Not really, but it was given as no, he truly was a hero. He was the bravest man I knew, which I disagree with. But yes, it is a retcon redemption, saying no, in a different light, all the things he did were actually good. So if you are a creator, if you're wanting to create a satisfying redemption arc, you've got a lot of options, right? All of those are perfectly valid ways of doing it if you do it right. So how do you do it right? We've got Nux here from Mad Max Fury Road, which is a great action. Like this is a great redemption arc, honestly. And I hadn't thought of it until I was looking through my examples, but he's good. So we're gonna use him as we walk through this. So first of all, you need to sow the seeds of change. You need to show some moments where you can start to see that in their mind things are changing. They're starting to see that there is an issue with how they've been approaching things or how they've been looking at things. So Nux sees that he's expendable. He sees that no one really cares about him, and maybe there should be a little more care in the world. Make them suffer. That's we like to see people earn it, so we want to see some bad stuff happen to them. We want to see that they're getting their comeuppance from what they had, what they've wrought, what they've brought on themselves. We want to see there's a little bit of revenge fantasy involved in redemption. We want to see them get what they deserve. Then they have to hit rock bottom. So this is the point where they're left with the choice of what I've been doing is not working. It's left me in this state. I am not moving forward in the way that I want to be, and perhaps a perspective change is in order. Maybe they see how much they've hurt other people, or maybe their actions have come back to hurt them. Maybe it's hurt a loved one of theirs. But they have to hit a point where they can choose to double down, stick with what they're doing, or they can choose to start on the path of redemption, which is going to hurt, but ultimately be better for them. And that has to feel like a true choice where they really could go either way. Make them sacrifice. This is the other part of the making them suffer, but this is not just them getting what's coming to them from their own actions. This is them choosing to make sacrifices toward their redemption. So they have to start doing things that hurt them in order to be selfless or in order to redeem themselves. Incorporate trust issues. The heroes aren't going to just immediately welcome them into the fold. There's got to be moments of, do we trust them? Are they actually playing us? Is this some sort of long game? And have them have to earn it. They have to be okay with being, chained up to the tree every night because we don't know if you're going to stab us in the back. You have to have them earn the trust that they don't already have. You can also include doubt or relapse. You have to give them opportunities to go back to their old selves. For a true redemption arc, they're not going to do that. They're going to see the opportunity to do the bad thing and they're going to turn away from it. You have to give them those options though, because if they aren't given the option to relapse, then they aren't truly redeeming themselves because they're not choosing the way forward that is best.
And I'll say this has a lot to do with the hero's journey as well. A lot of these are elements of how you create a good guy anyway. It's just interesting to hear them in this different context.
Yeah, I mean, a redemption is a form of the hero's journey. You are
Mhm.
just starting, rather than starting as an everyman, you're starting on the wrong side. It's simply a longer road. The final element of this is optional. Do you give them a happily ever after, and do they deserve it? You can end with them dying in service. You can end with them being taken out, or you can end with them like truly dying, or truly continuing to live happily and continuing the fight as a hero. That's up to you, and it's up to the kind of story that you're wanting to write. If you're writing a tragedy, then obviously they're going to die in the attempt. If you're writing a romance, you have to have a happily ever after. That's a genre standard. So it depends on the kind of story that you're writing, but consider which one of those is going to fit your story best. Now that's all I have. Again, I'm Daphne Strasert. You can find me at daphnestrasert.com. You can also contact me at daphne@tomeworksedits.com, and you can find me everywhere on the internet as Daphne the Writer. Any further thoughts, Sean?
Thank you so much, Daphne. And yes, anyone who has questions, examples, thoughts, tell us your favorite. Hop in the Discord, and should be able to answer some questions when this goes live on Right Hive for sure. I like the idea as well of the like bad guy who is not completely redeemed, you know. I This has so many gray areas in terms of both, you know, you're doing the redemption arc, good and evil, but also where they're still a bad guy. They're still a
Mhm.
bad guy, and yet because of some personal reason, you know, they are nice to the characters in the story. So I think that this can be explored further for sure. You know, like what's a redemption arc without redemption? You know, there's so many aspects of romantasy where people are falling in love with monsters and villains, and it feels like society and contemporary fiction is kind of changing on what's required for an exact redemption.
The requirements for what is considered a hero are certainly changing as well, right? What is acceptable in terms of behavior has changed. You have stalker romance, you have definitely the mafia romance where, you know, you lots of murder and that's considered okay. The what is considered okay when it's in terms of in the name of love is shifting. And it depends on your audience. It depends on what your readers want, whether that is acceptable or not.
Another thought I had as well while I was listening to you is some of these where, you know, Anakin being able to be like a Force ghost and stuff like that, or the acceptance of the good guys for someone who is the redeemed character, and that is fate and necessary evil. Like, if you wouldn't have done this terrible thing, then we would not have ended up at this better results. You know, we might have been stuck in stasis forever. And so that's seemingly, you know, like it's within the plot, it's a little bit nerfed, but at the same time, my redemption arcs oftentimes are like, that's okay that you did this terrible thing because it was necessary for the greater good.
Right, right. Honestly, what would be a fun corollary to this presentation would be talking about the opposite, which is typically called a villain origin story, but I like to refer to as I can make him worse. But someone who is on the side of good and realizing that that's really not what needs to be happening. And so they go down the spiral of villainy.
Yay. Well, thank you so much, Daphne. And like I said, everybody, toss your ideas, your thoughts, your responses, and maybe something about your own writing. What redemption arcs have you written? We want to hear about them in the Discord. We want to keep the conversation going. And Daphne, you'll be there to respond and
Well,
say hi to people. Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us.
thank you, Sean.